There's see here. Guess I could put that there, but I don't like that. Can't believe I don't have okay. All right. Before I start, I want to give this shout out News Nation, Ross Coulthart, and who's this guy? Let's see. Be going over the stuff about JFK, Deepstate, and everything else. And also go into the mafia, stuff like that. So, they're likely to comment. Let's get into this fair use. Although this also put my own experiences in this with UFOs, paranormal, etc. And what I know about corruption, deep state. Let me put this up. As well as corruption in the government.
Out of I admit it would have to be a very brief analysis of the voluminous document. Great background running back 50 years, who spent a lot of time investigating the crimes of the CIA exposed during Watergate and the Church Commission. Danny, what comes out of your, I admit it would have to be a very brief analysis of the voluminous documents that have been revealed this week in the JFK documents archive? Have you been able to reach any conclusions?
I initially started going through them sort of one at a time. And as you know, they're not identified. There's no designation of what the content of the document is. They just have these peculiar code that they're coded by. So I started going through them, and I started noticing, things that I hadn't known about, particularly before. That the details of different people that they investigated and that they found were the embassy, the Russian embassy, in Mexico City, some things like that. That I would have assumed to be true anyhow. But that as of right now, we're putting the documents into an AI system so that we can monitor them. We can put them up in text and then search the text. And so there's a few things that I'm focusing on, I know some certain dates and names that I want to pull out of there.
I'm talking to you in the context that you've been very outspoken publicly previously about your view that JFK was the victim of a conspiracy, that essentially the president was murdered in a coup d'etat. And you think that there were people in the CIA who were principally responsible for that coup d'etat. Is there anything in the documents you've seen to date that substantiates that or supports that conclusion?
I've only looked at, personally, the first, 100 or so that I've actually read, and there a lot of them are on a deeper background. So, but I know what I know from having talked to people that were directly involved. As you know, we interviewed Santos Trafficante, who put together the assassination team to kill Fidel Castro, which is the team that actually killed the president. We know that. That I know who was on the team that did it. I've also Dick Billings, who's the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, was one of our chief investigators on the case. I've talked with Eugene Wheaton, who was one of our principal investigators, who has talked directly with people who are involved in the assassination, firsthand kind of witnesses that I know about. And so what we're going to be doing is searching through these documents for particular dates and names and times that we know are pertinent. That's what we're going to be doing. But as of right now, the ones I've found, just in the first 100 of them or so, have not revealed anything particularly new that I didn't know about before.
Why do you believe there was a conspiracy to kill JFK? I mean, let's be clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about a coup d'etat. That's an idea that is poo-pooed and dismissed by much of the national security establishment, much of the...
Well, of course it is. They had everything to do with this. They hated JFK. The CIA hated JFK. You had, some people in the FBI that did stuff like that. You had the mob as well that wanted JFK, RFK killed, etc. They had brainwashing. They had different programs to flip the switch on people's minds, mind control programs, etc. So he's about 7 decades late to this thing, but
the establishment media. Why do you believe there was a conspiracy?
Military.
Well, when I first became involved in the professional investigation of this, as distinct from a hobby or some kind of avocation, I became professionally involved when I was one of the 3 trial lawyers in the office of Attorney F. Lee Bailey, who was the #1 criminal defense attorney in the country at the time. I became involved with him in 1972.
Because he was defensive.
I was contacted by Lee Bailey from the firm where I was on Wall Street after having graduated from Harvard Law School and being a co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. And Bailey had contacted me, when I was still at law school, trying to draft me to come to his firm. And I had declined. And gone to the big law firm down on Wall Street because I could do trials. But when Lee got retained in June of 1972, immediately following the Watergate burglary on June 17th, he called me and kind of pleaded with me to come over to his firm to participate in this. And I did. So I came in, and the first thing that I noticed is that the 3 of the gunmen, that are 3 of the people that were in the Watergate Hotel with James McCord, who was the defendant that our firm was representing, of the CIA wiretapping specialist. These are gunmen for Santos Trafficante, the Don of the mafia in Havana. I recognized the guys, who they were, and so I said, look at to Lee and the other guy. I said, what the hell are Trafficante gunmen doing in the Watergate Hotel with these guys? And so I began to investigate that.
And a lot of the mob, has been used by the CIA, trafficking cocaine, drugs, weapons, and other stuff and everything. So there's a lot of criminal organizations that works hand in hand with the CIA.
We had a staff of 40 Class A licensed gun carrying investigators that worked for us full time. And so I got my investigators to go look into this. And what we discovered, one of the first things we discovered, is that our senior partner, F. Lee Bailey, turned out to be on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency. That he was, in fact, on Index 4. There were 4 lawyers that were on retainer to represent any CIA agent who was caught engaged in covert operations inside the United States, which are totally illegal under the charter. And he was one of the 4, along with Bennett Williams and a fellow named Miller and another fellow. And so that was a surprise to us, even to the investigators. And then second thing we discovered is that one of his secret clients was Santos Trafficante. And so we interviewed Santos Trafficante. We got to interview him directly. We brought him in from Tampa, and we went down to Miami, Orlando actually, and interviewed him there. Our chief investigator, Bad Andy Tuning, and we interviewed him, and he told us all about it. He told us that the reason that his people were in the Watergate Hotel with the CIA wiretapping specialist was to try to find out. They were wiretapping the telephones and electronically bugging the office of Lawrence O'Brien, who had just become the new head of the Democratic National Committee there in the Watergate Hotel.
Well, I mean, one thing is, and this is fact, on both sides, there's crookedness on both sides. However, the mob has always been Democrat because they are easier to manipulate. They are easier where they are to bid on illegal activity and stuff. They're more easy to corrupt than, say, people on the right that are more religious and stuff like that. So it does them. You got the mob, it was CIA doing this stuff to Nixon and stuff like that because they don't want them there where, Democrats are more corruptible. Except for what happened with JFK and RFK.
And what happened is Mr. Nixon was terrified. Once Larry O'Brien became the head of the Democratic National Committee, because immediately prior to his becoming the head of the Democratic National Committee, Larry O'Brien had been for 20 years the chief lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for the billionaire Howard Hughes. And it turns out that Richard Nixon, now running for re-election in 1972,
is that Howard Hughes, he was, of course, head guy with Hughes Aviation and stuff like that. He was a pilot himself. He might have been in World War I. Might have. I don't remember that. He's a world famous aviator. Okay? Top notch. He built a lot of different, top notch planes. Whether it be fighter planes or if it would be, passenger airliners, stuff like that. Spruce Goose is, of course, the most famous of what Howard Hughes created, that go along the ocean and then fly and stuff like that. He had, how he could have any power is beyond me because he was a hypochondriac. He had very bad mental problems because of an accident he had flying a plane around, LA, Hollywood area, and they had to use somebody else's blood to replace all the blood that he lost. From then on, he had bad psychological problems about having other people's blood in his, and people could see, a movie about that. Howard Hughes and stuff like that. It's a good movie and everything. And he wouldn't take showers. He peed in jars and stuff like that and everything. Very bad mental disorders, so they like to keep him hidden. And he had bad memory issues and everything. And he would say the same thing over again. Very bad mental issues where he could not really run his company, but he was. Other people would run it for him, kind of like with Biden. How other people around the country say he was running it, he wasn't.
When he was back in 1960, was the vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower. Richard Nixon, as the vice president back in 1960, had chaired the 5412 committee, the subcommittee in the National Security Council that oversees covert operations. And in that capacity, and this is what Trafficante told us. He said, the day that Nelson Rockefeller withdrew from the Republican presidential primary race in 1960, Richard Nixon then knew he was going to become president. He was going to be the Republican nominee, and he was sure he was going to be able to beat this young upstart kid from Massachusetts, right? So therefore, Richard Nixon, vice president then, got on the phone, the red phone, the secured encrypted phone for the 5412 committee, and called Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes was a secret consultant to the National Security Council. doing things like building the Glomar Explorer to pick up Russian submarines off the bottom of the ocean, and a couple other major programs, the C-5A, a prototype for the C-5A, and all those, the Summa Corporation. And the bottom line is that Nixon, in that phone call, asked Howard Hughes to set up a political assassination team to kill Fidel Castro.
He didn't have the mind so much to be doing this. I don't know. I mean, there's sometimes he have part of his mind together. He had people that would come over to his house to get him working, and he was a recluse all the time, a hermit. Wouldn't take showers, very dirty and stuff like that. There's certain things he could do when he focused, but I don't know. So this doesn't make sense.
And Raul Castro and Che Guevara, he wanted them assassinated, but he had to be completely kept away from the White House. And so Howard Hughes, what he did is brought in one of his lawyers, Bob Mayhew, and assigned it to Bob Mayhew, saying, "Look, you got to figure out how we can set up an assassination team to kill Castro." And so Bob Mayhew went to Johnny Roselli, who was the bag man there in Las Vegas for the casinos, the Desert Inn and the Sands, etc. And Bob Mayhew said, you guys have your own reasons for wanting to kill Castro. He shut down all your gambling casinos, etc. And so he made the contact,
especially the mob,
to set up the assassination team.
So Mayhew's role in the commissioning of the US Mafia to try to kill Castro, that's one of the so-called family jewels, one of the most important secrets that the CIA has tried to keep for many, many years. It did come out in the documents this week, this admission that the CIA, one of the family jewels that was admitted was the use of Mayhew to make these connections to the US Mafia. What I want you to get to, though, is where's the connection to the JFK assassination?
Well, it turns out that's the team that assassinated the president. And Trafficani told us that in late June of 1972. He told Bad Andy Tooney in the interview that, as long as we're under a complete attorney-client confidentiality here, let me tell you, the team that I put together at the request of Richard Nixon back in 1960 to kill Fidel Castro, these are the guys that killed the president. And he explained in detail the reasons how it happened. And that's so we had that information.
Do you think the CIA was knowingly involved in commissioning that attack on the president?
No, they didn't commission the attack. Well, what happened is that Allen Dulles Allen Dulles had already been dismissed by Kennedy as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Back in September of 1961.
I don't know how much.
Following the fiasco at the Bay of Pigs.
True,
and so he was pushed into retirement. But Dulles never left Washington. He stayed right there in Georgetown and was meeting regularly with Bissell and the other guys that were in the CIA.
Bissell was, I think, the deputy director of operations for the CIA at the time.
That's right. And so they kept meeting with Dulles, and Dulles continued to be sort of the de facto director of the agency still, because Kennedy McCone, who was a total outsider, was not in the intelligence community at all, but he Kennedy brought him in to kind of organize and discipline the agency. But Dulles remained the actual operational chief. It was Dulles that greenlighted the assassination.
You're saying that 53 years ago, in 1972, you became aware from a mafia boss, Trafficani, that there was a definite collusion between sections of the US government and the US mafia to kill President JFK.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that there was a collusion to kill Fidel Castro, and then what happened is that that was in 1960, okay, and that assassination team continued to be operational all that time. What happened is when Robert Kennedy, following the Cuban Missile Crisis, ordered when Robert and John Kennedy ordered the closing down of the anti-Castro paramilitary all through the southeastern United States, on No Name Key and Swan Island and in the Everglades and over on Lake Pontchartrain. We know exactly where they all were. Ordered those to be shut down, and they refused. They actually launched an additional attack against the island of Cuba and sank a Russian ship, after Kennedy had ordered them to stop. So Kennedy, John Kennedy, along with Attorney General Bob Kennedy, what they did is they sent helicopter gunships, 6 helicopter gunships manned by U.S. Marshals into No-Name Key and burnt out the base and arrested those people that were anti-Castro Cubans. They viewed that as a betrayal back then. But actually, Robert talked them out of being furious with him, but he agreed to kind of continue Operation Mongoose now to try to overthrow the government down there. But what happened is after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he shut them down, and they viewed that as...
The war machine today is a scam to the Pentagon, and all these weapons and fighter jets we're making, everything, it's all a scam. It's all fake. It's a deep state. It has to be destroyed. Along with so much of our government and everything, and the politicians, psychopaths and stuff like that. They're not like a peace happening. They want a total annihilation of the Soviet Union and stuff like that, which is crazy because Patton, that's what he wanted, and he might have been killed. He might have been killed for being a danger, and at that time, though, they kicked Patton out because he wanted, go destroy the Soviet Union, go to Moscow and stuff. And everyone at that time refused to do that and stuff. So.
Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were talking about using their respective executive authorities to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of both nuclear arsenals, because they were both so terrified about how close they had come to destroying the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis that they both agreed they were going to do this. And John Kennedy was in the process of getting ready.
Of course, I heard much about that as far as them dismantling. I didn't hear so much about that, but just they wanted to take a step back and have more communication. Actually, they didn't want to stop the nuclear weapons thing, and this is another reason why they kicked Khrushchev out as well. Khrushchev is luckily he wasn't assassinated, but he was kicked out. Though over time, he was. They both military parties of the United States and the Soviet Union did not want peace. They wanted to keep their war machine going and stuff like that, scam that. This is happening around the world, stuff. So they want their toys of war, weapons of war, toys, and to use them and stuff at the price.
Start ordering the dismantling and destruction of the U.S. nuclear warheads, and Allen Dulles wasn't going to allow that to happen, because not in his capacity as the CIA director, even the fired CIA director, but because he was the legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, a group of major...
One thing I gotta say is that the reason why Trump has revoked security clearances is because of threat of his life from, Democrats and stuff like that and other extremists. Both sides do this. Okay, it's gotten a lot more extreme these past years, of course. There's been more hate and rhetoric and weaponization of both political parties against each other. But this is also a normal thing as well. Well, the thing is, actually, usually, this is a new thing. Usually you didn't have to worry about the other side try to circumvent another administration. That's never what happened back then. And it's a lot more extreme.
We had major investment interests in Asia, and they knew that they needed to keep the nuclear weapons in order to combat China, because China had showed them in Korea that they could put 1 million men into uniform, and they needed the nuclear weapons.
Do you think Lee Harvey Oswald was
true.
involved in the murder of JFK in any capacity at all?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. He had been recruited early on, back when he was in the Marine Corps, in a thing called Operation Red.
Well, the CIA's had brainwashing programs and mind manipulation programs and stuff like that, where they could, make a person be a totally different person, flip the switch, and he back to his normal self, like the Manchurian Candidate, stuff like that. So I believe that's probably what happened, obviously, with Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, they've been doing these things since the 1950s. It's the perfect assassin, the perfect agent, spy to have. Is one that doesn't know that they're an operative and they can flip the switch, change a person's character back and forth, because then they can't rat. They can't say, all their memory is like wiped when they flip the switch and everything.
Redskin, it was code name, to pretend that you're a Marxist and try to infiltrate Russian or Marxist organizations, etc. He had become, after he came back from Russia, he had become part of a thing called foreign field operations intelligence, it was called, and he worked secretly as a covert operative for that group that was funded by E.H. Hunt and a guy by the name of William D. Pauley and a guy by the name of Charles Willoughby, who was the G2 head of intelligence for MacArthur, General MacArthur. Hardcore right-wing people, all down in Texas, and this group was running Oswald. Oswald got recruited, and the whole purpose of Oswald was to take a shot at the caravan, at the Kennedy caravan coming through Dallas. And then when he got caught, he was going to have all these manufactured relations with Russia and with Cuba, hopefully, and they could blame it on them, so they could use that to justify invading the island of Cuba. But once he took one shot at him and didn't hit him, didn't even try to hit him, he fired the shot that hit the curb near the place, and that was what he thought he was doing. He shot that one shot, and all of a sudden, to his amazement, there were other shots rang out. And the whole S-force that had been created by Santos Traficante to kill Castro as of 1960, they were all there. Almost all of them were there in Dealey Plaza. And the S-force killed the president. And when Oswald realized that he'd been flummoxed, and tried to run, they sent Tippit after him, the Dallas police, and Oswald killed him. He did. I'm sure of that. He killed the Tippit, and that's what he was in fact arrested for.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
He was arrested for killing Tippit to start with, but he said, "Look, somebody come and help me." And he actually tried to make a phone call. He asked to have a phone call made out of the jail that night to the guy that was one of his trainers in Operation Redskin in North Carolina. We know that.
Yeah. What happened to Traficante, the man who gave you this evidence, Danny?
He ended up dying of old age. The mob guys had designed a kind of immunity against getting really effectively prosecuted because of their alliance with the agency, not only in setting up the assassinations to kill Fidel Castro, but in smuggling the heroin into Southeast Asia, from Southeast Asia into Havana. Right. The partners in that were Santos Traficante and Batista, the dictator of Cuba, and a guy by the name of Paul Helliwell. Full-time employed Central Intelligence Agency guy. He had dental coverage from the CIA, this guy. And they were partners in the heroin trafficking, using a part of the skim of the money off that to buy weapons and explosives to smuggle to the Kuomintang in China. This is a complex story, but we know all the details of it. So they've been deeply in bed with them.
I guess what I'm asking is, why didn't the House Assassinations Committee, which did its report much later after you were told this in 1972, why didn't they call somebody like Trafficante? I mean, if this was known at the time, why weren't these allegations fully investigated?
Well, you remember who they did subpoena was Sam Giancana, who ended up being murdered within 48 hours of receiving his subpoena. Yeah. And they subpoenaed Johnny Roselli, who ended up being murdered within 48 hours of his subpoena.
There's a pattern.
And so that these guys were getting freaked out. Now, I know this because Dick Billings, who was the chief staff writer for the assassination, and I knew Gaetan Fonzi, who were the major investigators, they all freaked out. In fact, when Gaetan Fonzi went to interview another one of the witnesses down in Texas, the guy, he went to his house in the morning. His daughter told him that he was out and he'd be back in later in the day. He came back later in the day and the guy had been murdered, you know? And so these guys were all freaking out. I mean, this is a major dramatic story. These guys are all getting killed off.
So do you think it's actually conceivable that the CIA leadership didn't have any knowledge at all, any forewarning of the assassination? They did have Oswald under observation. There's clear evidence that Oswald was under surveillance. But from what you're suggesting, the implication is that the leadership of the CIA at the time, not the former director of Central Intelligence, Alan Dulles, was involved. But the leadership of the CIA at the time was unwittingly caught up in a plot that they really didn't have any knowledge of.
Well, I would think that probably Bissell knew. Bissell was close enough to Dulles to know that they were getting set to kill the president. And you need to understand, the reason that they had to kill him, they thought, was because he was a traitor. He getting set to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of our United States nuclear arsenal. I mean, they couldn't wait for a year to the 1964 elections to get rid of him, because he would have undertaken the disassembly of our nuclear warheads. And so that they felt authorized basically to kill him as a traitor to the country. You know, he was getting set to sell us out to the Russians, they thought. You know, and so that Bissell, I think, was involved in it. And William D. Pauley, I know William D. Pauley told Dick Billings that they were going to kill the president. He told him that.
If this is true, Danny, do you think the American public can deal with such an idea that a section of the state would try and kill a sitting president because they disagreed with his motives to try and essentially stop the nuclear arsenal?
Surely. You know, the fact is that a majority of Americans believe that the president was killed by a conspiracy already. And the majority of those people believe it was the CIA. And it wasn't technically the CIA, but it was high-level operatives of the CIA that were directly involved.
It's just like in a courtroom, go to a trial for a murder or whatever. There's circumstantial evidence that applies to these cases, or other types of lesser charges. And they bring circumstantial evidence in. I think, with those cases, how people have been found guilty, I'm sure people in the CIA would, some people in the FBI and Dallas police would. Dallas police, there were people involved in that, as well as the FBI, not just the mob. People in the military, stuff like that.
Can I ask you this, Danny, on a broader theme? President Trump has repeatedly talked during his campaign about the notion of a deep state, something I have to admit I've always been very dismissive of. Do you think there is a deep state in American politics?
Very stupid.
Yes, absolutely is. In Robert Kennedy Sr., knew that there was.
Yeah.
Schlesinger, Arthur
there's always
Schlesinger has
been
talked
a
about it.
deep
So Bobby is the guy that knew more about
Always been
the
some kind
dark
of deep
secrets
state.
of how the power really flows along the secret streams in the background,
Right.
and that the CIA is instrumental in that. The CIA is instrumental as the deep state. That once it was created in 1947 by the National Security Act of 1947, they were deeply involved, not only with the mafia,
the UFO
in organized crime, in massive drug smuggling, heroin smuggling, as a means of generating covert funds for covert operations. They did not want to report to the Congress, but they were in fact directly involved in assassinating foreign heads of state and unseating government officials. They unseated Frank Church, for example. They sent millions of dollars into the next campaign of Frank Church, who chaired the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. They showed up in his, and we tracked the money right out of the Nugan Bank in Australia. Came from the Nugan Bank and through 2 South African banks into the campaign, and was in favor of
Alan Dulles and other possible individuals inside the CIA, like Bissell.
Yeah.
We're never going to get to the truth of it, are we?
I think we are. There are still people. For example, if the head of the House Oversight Committee will issue a subpoena to Carl Jenkins, who's the man who trained the assassination team down in Oaxaca, Mexico, on the ranch of Clint Mercerson Jr., and sat in meetings with Rafael Chichi Quintero and Felix Rodriguez discussing their role in the assassination of the president, he is still alive. Jeff Morley's been visiting him, trying to get him to come forward to talk about this. If he could be given immunity, he probably would still refuse to talk. But the fact is, he knows. He knows from direct conversations with those guys that they did it. So there are still some people alive today who know about this thing in the first hand. There's the pilot, for example, that flew them out of Dallas. He's still alive. And so there's a handful of people that are still alive who can provide the firsthand information. The problem is that the government people don't want to know. They don't want to do anything to exercise government power of subpoena power or grand juries or anything to confirm this, because they think it undermines the authority of their governing elite, who have known about this and let this thing go. That's the alliance with the deep state. They're afraid of the deep state. I can guarantee you, anybody who authorizes a subpoena to go to Carl Jenkins is going to be out of office the next election cycle, because there are going to be millions of dollars flow into their campaigns against them, just as they did with Frank Church and Dick Clark and Birch Bayh and others. And they know that. And everybody in Washington knows that. They only talk about this in a whisper, under their breath. But everybody is afraid of these deep state people because we've allowed it to burgeon through the Central Intelligence Agency's Operations Directorate.
What would you say to President Trump? He staked a large part of his reputation on being open with the American people about the operations of the so-called deep state. What would you say to President Trump? I mean, obviously, we can't expect democratically elected Congress people who are susceptible to influence and cajoling and intimidation to call people like Jenkins, the guy you're talking about. Yeah. How do we do it then? How do we bring that deep state to account, if such a deep state actually does exist?
I think that what we've got to do is mobilize the American citizens so that they're taking this not only seriously enough to believe that the fact that there is such a conspiracy, and it's probably that the CIA was involved in some way, but we've got to mobilize the people so that this becomes a first table issue for them, so that they're all talking about it and they're demanding it, insisting upon it, and so that the degree to which Donald Trump becomes responsive to major pressure on the part of
the thing is, this doesn't just threaten Donald Trump, but this is for all presidents. And who controls some of the media who tries to influence the media. The FBI and the CIA both have actors and have non-governmental organizations that they use as puppets in a way, and to feed the machine that they want to feed a narrative or whatever. A side also that would benefit intelligence and benefit FBI and stuff like that. There's a huge deep state, National Security Council, CIA, NSA, other intelligence organizations. We have over 21 intelligence organizations and advanced research project organizations, defense, contractors, etc.
Citizenry. He might be one of the very few kind of people that would do this, would dare to do something like this.
Okay, so for somebody watching this, somebody who's not cognizant of the full details that you clearly have at your reach, why does it matter? Why does the death of a president nearly 62 years ago still matter if that death was a conspiracy?
It'll be just like Ross Perot.
Because Deepstate's still here.
When we were working together, he said, as long as these people are still in operation, no man can really call himself president.
Even greater.
That's what Ross said to me when we went after the off-the-shelf enterprise in the Iran-Contra case. We went after them because Theodore Shackley, who was the head of covert operations for the CIA, handpicked by George H.W. Bush, when he was the director of the CIA. Was the guy who ran assassination programs around the world, and that this was an extraordinarily dangerous guy, and we knew it. But Ross Perot went after him, and is the guy that I got to go to talk to Bill Webster, the head of the FBI, to initiate the criminal investigation of the off-the-shelf enterprise of Colonel North.
There are a lot of conspiracies that the establishment in America is very dismissive of. One of them, of course, is the idea that JFK was murdered in a conspiracy. The other, and I know you've taken a very close interest in this through your New Paradigm Institute in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the UFO issue, the idea that the United States is involved in a secret program of retrieval and reverse engineering of non-human technology. A lot of people just laugh and scoff at that idea. But I'll ask you this way. Do you think there is a connection between that UAP conspiracy, so-called, and the death of JFK?
Absolutely. But it's not what people think. People just think that because they've gotten word that Kennedy asked for a briefing on the UFO issue, that sort of got him killed because it was the deepest, darkest secret, which it is.
That's not.
But the reality is it's tangentially related, because what happened is when John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were having these secret exchange of these 18 letters that Norman Cousins was carrying back and forth between the two of them, in which they were agreeing.
And I said, I don't think Kennedy knew all stuff about UFOs and reverse engineering and stuff like that. I don't.
That they agreed that they were going to have a joint space program. Kennedy and Khrushchev, they were going to have a joint.
Hold on just a second. Hold on. Get that off. Right. Let's get this. changing feeds.
Soviet American space program exploring outer space. And what Kennedy did is on June 5th of 1963, he reached out to McCone, John McCone, and asked to be briefed in on the UFO information because he was intending to give it to Khrushchev as a sign of good faith that they were going to go out into outer space together, and they both needed to know about this, right? And it was that tipped Dulles when Kennedy on June 5th of 1963 demanded to get the briefing on the UFO issue. The word went out to Dulles that had happened, and Dulles then started investigating, and he found out about these 18 letters that were being exchanged, which the agency didn't know about. So that's what happened. Is Kennedy's
Well, Kennedy knew they could not trust the military and stuff. You know, my father's, like he said, they wanted Kennedy to nuke Cuba and the USSR. He said that. You know, my father and stuff and other people that were there. Okay? So, I mean, I know this is fact and stuff like that. They did not want peace whatsoever. They wanted the military-industrial complex to keep running. The oil to keep going or keep running and everything, the lube and everything else. And the war machine, tanks, fighters, troops, never-ending war to keep going. So that's they saw peace as a threat, and instead of peace is supposed to be the end game, not war. As I saw Vietnam and stuff, that's not what, you know, these organizations, these criminals that are running the government, you know, intelligence and military are very criminal psychopaths. They want to keep having
for the UFO briefing leaked out to Dulles, and Dulles then investigated it with his people in the agency. And
I do need to put a disclaimer. Go back because keep interrupting. I should put a disclaimer that we do need a military, but we don't need all the industrial complex with it in the scale. That is, you know, we have UFOs, we have not UFOs, but reverse engineered technology. They go to other galaxies, and we have these psychopaths running defense contractors, you know, stuff like that. Why you spend billions upon billions, hundreds of billions, and trillions of dollars on new weapons programs and stuff like that. It's all a scam. But we have, you know, all this other stuff, reverse engineered stuff, that could do everything. Alternate energy.
And FBI and other places. And then they found out about it. And that's what they said, okay, that's it. This guy's got to go.
Daniel Shen, we know that in the wake of the debacle of the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, sponsored by the CIA of Cuba, we know that President Kennedy was furious with the CIA, and in fact on one occasion he reportedly said that he wanted to shatter the agency into 1,000 pieces. At the heart of this issue is the question that I think Donald Trump has to confront as president of a new administration.
The thing is that when Truman made it, this stuff is that they were created to be able to do international espionage, reconnaissance, spying and stuff like that, where they would have a lot of autonomy. This is what people don't understand, how the CIA has these powers. They have natural immunity from criminal acts, you know, even murder and stuff like that. They have natural immunity that, you know, even the police does and politicians do to a certain degree. But with CIA, FBI, it's a whole different level. and stuff like that. With the CIA being a foreign entity and stuff like that that has this immunity to do things, create special access programs above top secret that they aren't even supposed to be beholden to the president all the time. And this was also a mistake as well, because the president is supposed to be in charge of all this. And there's a lot of problems that was created in its creation that has led up to the criminality of what
is
is
the
happening
CIA
today.
too powerful? Is a president legitimately able to run this country?
Yes.
No, there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. It is the seat, along with this.
But you can't just go after the CIA's National Security Council, the NSA, and other intelligence agencies. You take out the CIA, there's the NSA, there's other intelligence organizations out there. You know, you have to take out another dozen or so, couple dozen, you know. You have defense contractors.
They call it the Majestic 12 group that is in control of the UFO deep secret information and the back engineering of that special technology they have. That the CIA is deeply involved in that as well. They have a thing called I think it's Global Access Program. That's a code name inside the operations director of the CIA running that operation, and they are out of control. They are out of control, and they have threatened and removed people, not only United States senators, but President Carter. Theodore Shackley was deeply involved in negotiations with the Hezbollah that unseated President Carter back in 1980. You know, so that they've taken over the government in there. So in that sense, the Trump is correct that there's a deep state. He just doesn't know who it is yet. He thinks it's the bureaucracy. He thinks it's a bunch of middle-level bureaucrats, you know, that have kind of taken the bit in their teeth and want to govern things in their own way. That's a problem, and it's a real one. But that's not the deep state. The deep state flows out of the national security state that was set up in 1947 after World War II, in alliance not only with mafia, but with fascist elements. From the Third Reich, that they actually helped finance. I mean, the Brown Brothers Harriman, for whom Alan Dulles was the legal counsel in the consigliere for them. They're the ones that financed the actual construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich in Germany. You know, we know that. We know the bank accounts. We know exactly how they did this. People have to listen up. You know, if people are saying, oh, let's all get excited about the fact that they're releasing 80,000 documents about the Kennedy assassination, and the major media are going to play it, oh, well, we've searched through it and there's no smoking gun here. There's nothing of great revelation. So therefore, we have always been right. There's been no conspiracy. You know, I mean, anybody who believes that ought to have their head examined, you know. And the reality is that we know that this is true, and the people in Congress know this is true. And we've got to get them to stand up on their hind legs and use their authority, constitutional authority, now that the president is open to them doing it, and get to the bottom of this deep state and dig them out. And there's no better way to do it than through the investigation of the Kennedy assassination and the secrecy around the UFO issue. These two issues, both of which have been assigned by the Oversight Committee of the House of Representatives to this new task force. And so that we're meeting with the task force people. We're going to be providing information from the New Paradigm Institute and through our investigative resources to them, since they have no funding and they have no staff. You know, so what we're going to, I'm flying in Monday morning to meet with them. I've already had an initial debriefing with their staff people, Nancy Mace's people, and I'm flying in Monday to meet with them, and I'm going to meet with people inside the Trump administration. Also to brief them on all of this, because they know I know. You know, they know I know. And so I'm getting set to talk with them now. I'm perfectly willing to challenge any effort to enforce the attorney-client privilege over the information that Trafficante gave to us. There's an explicit exception to the attorney-client privilege, and that is when you know that the lawyers are involved in a criminal conspiracy with their clients to commit crimes. And that's exactly what F. Lee Bailey was doing, and then that's why I quit and walked out of there, and that's why I quit.
Yeah.
Daniel Sheehan, I hope it doesn't take another 60 plus years before we get to the truth of the JFK assassination or the UFO mystery. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, I just get to another one. Before we do, I need to. A lot of stuff in the 80s from different sources from Dallas Police Department, the FBI be involved, CIA, the mob, military, etc. Even stuff, my father and stuff. So this give a shout out and leave a like here.
Is lying. I think this is what he was told and this is what he believed. But I can tell you emphatically that Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. He was involved with the mob. I don't believe RF Kennedy Jr. is lying. I think this is what he was told and this is what he believed. But I can tell you emphatically that Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. He was involved with the mafia. He was tied up with Frank Costello. As a matter of fact, there was a point in time when Frank Costello wanted to kill him. I heard it from different sources at different times. They weren't together. I had discussions with my father about it, who was around and was in the know. He was the underboss of the Colombo family at that time. He had no reason to make it up. My dad wasn't personally involved in this, but sure, he knew about it. Everything in the world is corrupt. Every agency on the face of the earth. The most corrupt agencies, institutions in the world are governments. Going back to the days prior to the Roman Empire, they're always corrupt. They're always in need of reform. They're the biggest agencies around, and there's corruption in all of it. We're seeing it now. The fraud, the abuse. We're seeing it. We've witnessed it. We know it. So why is it so far-fetched to believe that a government agency like the CIA, who hated these people, wouldn't be involved in the assassination?
Yes. Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end, my friends. And as always, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. I was just watching an interview with RFK Jr. that he had with Vlad from Vlad TV. Sure many of you know who Vlad is. I've appeared on his podcast many times. Good guy. And he had a pretty lengthy interview with RFK, really about his life story. And a lot of things came out in that interview about the JFK assassination, about his grandfather, obviously about his father, Robert Kennedy's assassination. And some of the things that he talked about, I want to react to because those that involve the JFK assassination, I think that he's been a little bit misled on, I would say. And I want to make this clear. I happen to like RFK Jr. very much. I think he's in a much needed position, making America healthy again. I think he's going to do a great job there. He wants to make our kids healthy. He wants to make all of us healthy. And we need him, because there's a lot of obesity in this country. We're eating a lot of things we shouldn't be eating. And, he's got a really important job in my view. So I like him. I want you to understand that. So we're going to get into it. I took some notes, and I'm going to respond to some of the things that he said, in particular about his grandfather, about the JFK.
By the way, this is an update to the last one I did, so...
And maybe I'll mention a little bit about his dad's assassination. So let's get into this interview a bit, and I really encourage you to watch it. It was a good interview. But let's get in specifically about some of the things he said, and I'm going to respond to it. And this is RFK Jr. denies the bootlegging allegations against his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy. Obviously, I have something to say about this.
My friends, I know something about having power. Whether it's on the streets or in the media, it's all about who controls the narrative. And right now, the mainstream media is trying to control yours, whether you realize it or not. I've been using this platform called Ground News, and it's completely changed how I look at the news. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Remember the Hunter Biden pardon story? How can we forget it? It was everywhere. Well, over 1,000 news sources covered that same story, but watch what happens when we compare headlines from the different outlets. You see how each one spins it differently? That's what makes Ground News different. They're the only platform that lets you see exactly how the media machine works.
Absolutely.
And yes, it is a machine. They break down the political bias of every source. They show you which stories are being buried by different sides. And this is crucial. They expose who actually owns these news organizations, and that makes a difference, a big difference in how it's reported. In today's world, you can't afford to be in the dark. Ground News gives you something invaluable, and that is the ability to see through the smoke and mirrors and the gaslighting of mainstream media. Right now, you can get the same tools I use for half price. Just go to ground.news/MF or scan this QR code where you'll get 40% off their premium Vantage plan. Come on, that's less than a cup of coffee for the same tools I use to stay informed. You know, with everything that's happening in our country right now, so much going on, you need to see the full picture, not just what they want you to see. So don't wait on this. Take control of your information today. You want to be in the know the right way? Get to Ground News. It's an offer that you shouldn't refuse.
Address this rumor because, from what I understand, it's not true, but there was always the rumor that he was involved in liquor bootlegging.
And
Liquor bootlegging.
yeah, he was not. My grandfather went through 3 presidential appointments, including the head of the SEC, and he had a high job.
The SEC
Up in the
enforces the
shipbuilding for the
Securities
United States
Exchange
Navy, and he had,
Commission.
and he was the ambassador to the Court of St. James to England. He had to go through Senate hearings in each one. If he had had anything to do with the liquor industry or with prohibition, he had so many political enemies, and that would have come out.
The grandfather was the bootlegger who worked with the mafia.
Not true, because you had people on both sides that were involved in liquor racketeering and the mob back in those days during Prohibition. This is something which Prohibition should never have happened. Those that benefited was the mob and everything, racketeers and everything. You know, there was speakeasies, stuff like that. they benefited, they capitalized, made hundreds of millions and stuff like that off of Prohibition. It's criminals that made off with the money and everything. And so, I mean, to say that he wouldn't have gotten away with it, yeah, they would have, because both sides were in on the racketeering and mobs and the mafia and everything, and gave liquor and stuff. And they could have been routed out. They would have gone against Joe Kennedy, his father, his grandfather.
The mafia helped John
out.
F. Kennedy become president, and then when Bobby went after the mafia, they felt betrayed, so they, killed John F. Kennedy and so forth.
Yeah, and
You've heard this a million times.
I've heard it a million times, and they knew it was coming. So he went over to Scotland and he bought Pinch vodka, or Pinch whiskey, which was one of the premier whiskey companies. He did it with James Roosevelt, who was the president's son.
Okay.
The two of them bought it, and then they imported to Canada. I don't know how much, but a lot of the stuff. So it was at warehouses right next to the U.S. border. So the second that Prohibition ended, all the liquor came. Now, he was never accused of being a bootlegger until after he had his stroke and couldn't defend himself, and my uncle was killed. It was 1964. At that point, the CIA was trying to, let's say, disparage the rumors that they may have had something to do with President Kennedy's assassination. There was a big effort that was run by an individual in the CIA who had been the New York Times bureau chief in Havana. And his job for the next 30 years was blackening the Kennedy name. And that is one of the...
I'd say YouTube is terrible. Yeah, with subtitles, terrible. It's not just because of the way that he talks.
The rumors that he started.
Just in general.
Now, I'm going to say this. I don't believe RF Kennedy Jr. is lying. I think this is what he was told and this is what he believed. He was a youngster. He wasn't around really during that time. But I can tell you emphatically that Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. He was involved with the mafia. He was tied up with Frank Costello. As a matter of fact, there was a point in time when Frank Costello wanted to kill him. I heard this on very good authority. And again, people of substance in that life, they don't make things up. They don't say these things just to say them. When they talk, and I heard the things that I heard about the JFK assassination, it was from prominent people in that life. Not people that are just walking around the street, trying to throw their chest out and be important. These were prominent people that were in some way involved, with these happenings. So I'm speaking from authority in that regard. No, I wasn't there. No, I don't have firsthand knowledge, but I have knowledge from people who had firsthand knowledge. And I don't think they had any reason to lie to me. I heard it from different sources at different times. They weren't together. I had discussions with my father about it, who was around and was in the know. He was the underboss of the Colombo family at that time, and he had no reason to make it up. My dad wasn't personally involved in this, but sure, he knew about it. And let me go on and tell you a couple of things that I know. And before I get into that, I hope you're noticing this great 3/4 zip that I have on. My daughter Julia, a little history, and her fiance Tyler came to me and said, "Dad, we want to create a line of clothing for you. A wardrobe." I said, okay, go out and do it, right? So they know what I like to wear, and they know I like to be comfortable. And so they created this 3/4 zip, and it's really cool. They got it in black and white. It's got my monogram on it. It actually has one of my favorite Bible verses, one that's very meaningful to me, Proverbs 16:7. Many of you know I have that tattooed on my arm. And then they have the Made Man monogram right here on the sleeve. And really cool. The material is great, good quality, so I love it. And yes, they will be made available, so watch coming soon. She wanted to make sure that I liked it, and I really do. I know if my daughter's going to design something for me, I'm going to love it. She knows my taste. So really excited about it. Hope you like it. About Joe Kennedy and his mob connections. Multiple historians document Joe Kennedy's involvement with bootlegging during Prohibition, contrary to RFK Jr.'s denials. These are factual statements. They documented it. And you know, the fact that he went over to Scotland after Prohibition was repealed and bought a liquor company, well, why did he do that? Just out of nowhere? No, because he had experience as a bootlegger during Prohibition. He made a tremendous amount of money. He was involved with the mob, because you really couldn't be a bootlegger unless you were involved with the mob. That was it back then. We were the Do you know that there were...
Yeah. You could operate without the mob or gangsters, get involved, There's also upper command and where the only places where you can get liquor. If you're making money, the mob's going to find out. These bootleggers, everybody was going to report to the mob, to the mafia, right? So, I mean, this is what happens. And if they didn't report to the mob, they got big trouble. They're going to take out their profits, or whatever, threaten them, whatever. They put them out of business. They didn't cooperate, they just kill them and take over the territory they were doing business in, etc. There's a dog-eat-dog, kill for
something like 36.
So, you had to get permission to do this stuff from the mob and other gangsters just below that reported to the mob or whatever.
1,000 speakeasies in the state of New York alone. That's how popular liquor has been, and that's how much money was earned during Prohibition. I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it again.
Illegal,
it was Prohibition, the federal government, that made Cosa Nostra Mafia strong in this country. No doubt about it. They made hundreds of millions of dollars that would translate into billions of dollars in today's economy. Let me continue. Kennedy maintained relationships with Frank Costello. I know that for a fact. I've heard it so many times. Meyer Lansky and other prominent mob figures. Again, this is documented, not only coming from my mouth. FBI records indicate Kennedy used mob-connected individuals to distribute liquor in the Northeast Corridor. He had to use mob-connected individuals. It's like I said about the construction companies in New York during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They had to, in some way, be involved with the mob because we controlled the unions, so they had to use us. They weren't in bed with us, but they had to be involved with us in order to get anything done. You wanted a building to be built, you had to be involved with us because we controlled the unions. Very simple. Kennedy's Somerset Importers Company was established suspiciously quickly after Prohibition ended, suggesting pre-existing infrastructure, exactly what I just said. He didn't all of a sudden say, hey, I'm going to buy a whiskey company. He did it because he was involved in Prohibition. And like I said, I heard that Frank Costello was so upset with him at one time, wanted to kill him. Yep. They told him to back off because of his connections, his political connections, and they said he might come in handy someday. And obviously, that was the thought, and he did. Business dealings of Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy's acquisition of liquor distribution rights occurred before legal repeal was finalized, indicating insider connections, of course. Kennedy's real estate and entertainment industry ventures repeatedly intersected with known mob-controlled business. And again, this is documented. This is something I'm reading that was documented. Kennedy's banking operations in the 1920s involved several individuals later implicated in money laundering schemes. Now remember this when we get to the JFK assassination. Remember how hooked up Joe Kennedy was during Prohibition with the mob. Multiple associates from Kennedy's earlier career had documented ties to organized crime families. He was involved, no question about it. He was from Massachusetts, Boston, Northeast, mob-controlled areas, we know that. Political leverage. Kennedy reportedly used mob connections to secure political advantages throughout his career, one of them being his son, John Kennedy, elected as President of the United States. We're going to get into that. And let me tell you, at that same time, I told you this, Nancy Pelosi, her father was absolutely mobbed up. He became the mayor of Baltimore due to his mob connections. We put him in office. When I say we, my former associates. No doubt about it. That's why Nancy Pelosi thinks she's a mobster. That's why she talks that way. She acts that way. That's why she thought it was okay to bilk American citizens with her insider trading schemes. That's why she used her office to become a multi-millionaire. No doubt about it. So when these people try to, oh, we had nothing to do with the mob, we did. And I want to tell you something. You know, when I talk about mob, you know, relationship in this country, you got to understand, the mafia is part of history in this country. Look at how deeply involved they were with major figures, deeply involved. And we're going to get into that even further. So when people say, oh, Michael, you talk about the mob, that was your former life, it's part of history. It really is. All these people that are on this tapestry behind me, part of history. Well-known part of history. They infiltrated various businesses, political connections. They were part of history. They had an impact on the American way of life, no doubt about it. Kennedy's ambassador's appointment coincided with significant donations from businesses with known organized crime ties, including the Teamsters Union. Several Kennedy family properties were purchased through intermediaries connected to organized crime figures. And Kennedy maintained communication with mob-affiliated union leaders throughout his business career. No question about it. He was in the real estate business. You know, you had to be involved with the mob. So for people to say he never was, not true. And let me tell you something. RFK may be saying this innocently. Maybe this is the information that was given to him. I'm not saying he's lying about it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not suggesting that. This is what I believe he believes. And he was told these things, but it's not true. So, you know, I have to state what I know to be the truth. RFK Jr. refutes the claim that the Chicago Mafia helped JFK win his presidency and was later betrayed when RFK cracked down on organized crime. I've said this many times. I'm going to repeat it again. I said it on Piers Morgan. I said it on my own platform. There's no question that we were involved. When I say we, my former associates, Mafia, Cosa Nostra, was involved in the JFK assassination. I'm going to get into it. This is what RFK said during this interview. Quote, the rumor was always the grandfather was the bootlegger who worked with the Mafia, and the Mafia helped John F. Kennedy become president. And then when Bobby, his dad, went after the Mafia, they felt betrayed, so they killed John F. Kennedy. Something like that. I'm not saying they killed John F. Kennedy. What I am saying is they were involved in an assassination of John F. Kennedy. And I'm going to get into that and prove it more. Now, what he's saying happens to be true. Happens to be true. People were very upset because Joe Kennedy came to his mob-connected people in Illinois and said, we need the state of Illinois, we need the city of Chicago in order for JFK to become president. He was in a very, very tight race with Richard Nixon at that time, and Illinois was needed. So they went to us guys, and we pulled it off for them. And the agreement is that the Department of Justice would back off the Mafia because they were starting to really get heated. And the agreement was they would back off. They were really going after the mob. And remember this, you know, until Robert F. Kennedy really started to go after organized crime, J. Edgar Hoover would never even admit that the Mafia existed because we had stuff on him. We had him. And he wouldn't even admit it until Appalachia. He refused to admit it, but then he had to admit it.
Everybody and there's a lot of writers out there who would have liked to find some evidence. There's a guy called David Horowitz who spent years looking for that evidence and finally said, yeah, it's not there. It didn't happen. You know,
RFK is being misled here. There was a lot of people that did say that the mob was connected in this. There's no question about it. I've said this all the time. I don't believe that the Department of Justice, that the government wants anybody in the world to believe that the Mafia was able to get to a sitting president. I've said that. That's why the Warren Commission report was nonsense. We're seeing that now, and as more of these confidential, classified documents come out, we're going to see that the Warren Commission was totally whitewashed and not true. There was more than one shooter. I think we know that already. And they just tried to cover this all up. So let me keep going.
1959, I went to, and there's pictures of me sitting in the Senate hearing room on my mother's lap in the front row. My father eviscerated Sam Giancana.
Absolutely true. No question about that.
So Sam Giancana, I think, took the fifth 50 times in front of my father. My father ridiculed him. My father asked him, do you hang people from who cross you from meat hooks? Have you done that? He giggled, and my father said, "You're giggling like a little girl, aren't you?"
That's what Robert F. Kennedy said to Sam Giancana, who was a big shot, big mob guy in Chicago, as many of you know. He was later killed. He was murdered, but he was a big guy at that time, and he was intimately involved in the assassination of JFK.
With Sam Giancana, who he ridiculed, who he's putting in jail, who he's attacked for years, and they make up, and Sam Giancana gives my uncle the White House. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, he didn't cut a deal with Giancana. There's no question about it. RFK Sr. didn't know anything about this. He wouldn't have agreed to have his father, have his brother assassinated. Of course not. He didn't cut any deals with Giancana. Not saying that he did. As a matter of fact, to his detriment, to his brother's detriment, he didn't. And that's the problem here.
And they make up, and Sam Giancana gives my uncle the White House. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it does. And I'm going to show you why in a minute.
Kind of another rumor that was circulating at the time was that my uncle won the presidency by conniving with Mayor Daley to fix the Chicago vote. Well, Mayor Daley fixed the Chicago vote for the lower ballot candidates all the time, so nobody disagrees with that. The problem with this is that after that vote, first of all, after the vote, Mayor Daley was so outraged about these accusations that my uncle had won unfairly that he offered to do a recount and pay for it himself. He also, even if my uncle had lost Illinois, he would have still won the presidency.
I don't believe that's true. And even if it is true, at that time, when they came to us to help them win Illinois, maybe they weren't sure of that. Maybe they weren't. But they wanted Illinois. It was a battleground state, and they needed that state, and they came to us. And everybody knows Major Daley was corrupt. He was involved with us then. Everybody. Chicago was one of the most corrupt cities as far as mob involvement with politics in the whole country. Without a doubt. Chicago, New York, New Orleans with Carlos Marcellos. Without a doubt. We had tremendous influence there. Kansas City, Cleveland, tremendous influence that we had there. So, you know, he's being misled in this regard. And I'm saying this, he might totally believe this. Maybe if I sat down with him and gave him some more information, he would change his opinion.
At that time, he felt like it was the gravest threat to American democracy because the mafia had infiltrated all of these institutions that were key to our democracy, including the labor unions, but also the judiciary. They controlled a lot of judges. They owned a lot of Congress people. And he felt like it was a threat to democracy and ultimately the republic.
Absolutely true. He's confirming what I said. The mob in this country, the mafia, had a big impact on American culture, on American history. They're part of the history. We can't deny it. It is what it is. There's the Attorney General of the United States. His son is quoting his father. The Attorney General has said it. This is the kind of impact and influence we had in this country back during that time, during the golden era of organized crime mafia in this country.
And Hoffa hired people to kill my father.
Really?
Yeah, he hired a guy to shoot him in the swimming pool because my father swam every morning, and he hired and to firebomb our house.
Absolutely true. This did happen. Jimmy Hoffa hated RFK because he went after him. He wanted to get him out of the Union, and he eventually did. As a matter of fact, it later on led to Hoffa's death because when he was released from prison and wanted to get back into the Union and was told not to, we know what happened then. Disappeared.
But it was surrounded by roads and almost a square of roads. And those roads, all day long, there would be trucks going around our place, blowing their horns.
I heard that.
From the Teamsters Union.
Yes, because they were very, very upset. Why? Because RFK Jr. was going after their president, Jimmy Hoffa. All this is true.
They're controlled
now, let me
by
put this together.
the mob.
When the CIA, if it was that branch of the government, or whatever other government agency official came to the mafia, and they wanted to assassinate JFK for whatever reason they had. We know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. We know that John F. Kennedy Jr. did not like the CIA. We know that he did not like the Secret Service. He said bad things about them. And they, in turn, didn't like him. They didn't like him at all. There was a lot of friction between JFK and the CIA and the Secret Service. They didn't like him. As a matter of fact, I heard this, and I believe it to be true. The Secret Service, on the day that JFK was shot, was at minimal enforcement during that day, minimal security. The same thing that happened with Donald Trump, the day he was almost assassinated. Minimal security by the Secret Service. Is that a coincidence, or is that by design? Just roll that around in your head for a minute. Same thing happened with Trump. Minimal security on the day that he was almost assassinated in Butler, Pennsylvania. Same thing with JFK. Fact. There was lax security by the Secret Service, who didn't like JFK at that time.
And my father asked McComb during that conversation, did the CIA do this to my brother?
Now, why would he ask? Because JFK didn't like the CIA, they in turn didn't like him. It's starting to come together.
The Warren Commission said that Lee Harvey Oswald...
I'm not so sure that they didn't like him and stuff. I forgot one of the guys that was there at the time. I forgot, or a couple guys. I think they'd say it differently. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but I think they said differently if they realized it.
Oswald was a lone shooter, and nothing about Lee Harvey Oswald's life or the evidence. There was so much evidence, even at that time, when it was just a tip of the iceberg, that could not have possibly been true.
Well, I think we know that by now. You know, the fact that, again, you know, when JFK was in the car, this is minimal evidence, there's more, was allegedly shot from behind by Oswald. Well, when you look at the video, what happened? Boom, he went back this way.
Yeah.
Why would he be going back if he got shot in the back of the head? He would have slumped forward. That's minimal evidence. There's a lot more.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've said this once before, you know, JFK's brain was lost. It was in the National Archives, and now it's lost. How do you lose the brain of the President of the United States that's in the National Archives? You don't lose it.
Because the evidence says they were
You
lying
don't
up
lose
their
it.
asses.
Somebody took it out of there and got rid of it for whatever reason. What further evidence was in that brain? If somebody wanted to look at it later on, because people were really starting to doubt the Warren Commission's report, and maybe they would said, you know what, we got to take another look at this. So rather than allowing that to happen, his brain was lost. Give me a break. That brain was removed.
He had never said anything nice about Jackie and his wife. He worked for the mafia. He ran a strip club that had what they called B girls, which were girls that would change, you know, every 2 weeks or months, and a new group would be brought in. And those girls went to these B clubs all over the country, all over the Southwest, and they were part of a, you know, stable. That was part of Carlos Marcello's organization.
Right on, and I'm going to get to further factual information about that.
Yeah.
100% right. He was totally mobbed up,
less.
Jack Ruby. Jewish guy, Rubenstein his name was, totally mobbed up, going back to the days of Capone. Absolutely.
I would say there's so much evidence that it is that of CIA involvement, not only with my uncle's murder, but then with the, you know, the 60-year cover-up.
60-year cover-up, CIA. Let's put this together. We know for a fact that the CIA went to Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky during World War II. They needed help to get Allied troops into Sicily. Luciano made a deal through Meyer Lansky with them. This is fact. It's been reported many, many times and documented that if he were to get overturn his sentence or allowed to leave prison and he was already deported at that point, be allowed to come back to America through Cuba, that he would make it safe for the Allied forces to land in Sicily. That's exactly what happened. The CIA came to the mob for that help. They also came to Luciano and Meyer Lansky for help at the ports. We control the ports, and they needed things to be brought in and brought out. And they came to us, and we opened the ports for them. Fact, CIA involvement with the mob. Number two, when Castro, the revolution, very upset here. We didn't want communism in Cuba. So what happened again? CIA, they came to us again. And they had a plot that they...
Yeah, because the thing is, they didn't want communism there for not just political reasons, but because we couldn't have the casinos there, speakeasies, stuff like that. Couldn't make money in Cuba. Fidel Castro hated what the Americans and the CIA was doing. They're corrupt people, running the place. Fidel Castro is corrupt, crazy loon too, but he didn't like how Westerners were corrupting the country, with the alcohol, the gambling, and stuff like that, and drugs, stuff like that. So
they devised to poison Castro. We were involved with that. Fact. 100%. No doubt about it. They came to us twice. You got to understand this. CIA will deal with the devil to get their biddings done. They didn't care it was us.
So you also had to
deal with the devil. So they came to us twice before. Law enforcement, and another time, came to a friend of mine, a made guy along with me in the Colombo family, Greg Scarpa, to go down on a civil rights issue, to go in and to get some Ku Klux Klan people to admit to a lynching with 4 black guys, I believe, that were killed. Fact. So the law enforcement came to us, CIA came to us, government came to us. So the fact that the CIA, according to RFK Jr., and RFK had that suspicion, came to the mob to help in an assassination plot is not in any way out of the ordinary. This is what they do. He's confirming this. He doesn't realize it, but he's confirming it.
Yes,
let's get into now Jack Ruby.
Is.
The Warren Commission, many people said Jack Ruby had no mob connections. He was just a patriot that wanted to kill Oswald. Absolute nonsense. It's so ridiculous it makes no sense whatsoever. Let me give you a little background on Ruby. In his Dallas operations, Ruby operated multiple nightclubs serving as fronts for gambling operations run by Chicago and Dallas crime families. No doubt about it. And this isn't coming from me. This is documented. This is not what I knew. And
the reason why Ruby, of course, killed Lee Harvey Oswald is because he's going to say, like he said before he was shot and killed, he didn't do it. And he's going to talk too much. And they had to shut Lee Harvey Oswald up before he would talk. So Bob said, hey, go and kill this guy. So.
From my independent sources, what I knew. Ruby's Carousel Club, that was the name of his strip club, was documented as a meeting point for local organized crime figures. No doubt about it. That area was controlled by Carlos Mosello, who was the boss of New Orleans, Louisiana. Quote, Ruby served as an enforcer collecting gambling debts for Chicago mobsters operating in Dallas. Absolutely, 100%. He was under Ricardo, no doubt about it. He started with Capone. Police records show Ruby was arrested multiple times for weapons violations and assault charges related to protection rackets. Let me continue. His mob relationships. Ruby maintained direct connections to Chicago mobster Sam Giancana, who was what? Tied up with RFK. He was
Yes, his protection term that the mafia said for protection, it's really protection against them killing you and stuff like that. So
major target of RFK during that time. Heard it talked about by RFK Jr. and Tony Accardo. Ruby regularly traveled to Chicago, New Orleans, and Havana for meetings with known organized crime figures. Documented police reports, reporters' evidence. This isn't coming from me. This is documented evidence. Ruby was photographed with several high-ranking members of the Marcello crime family. Photographed by who? The FBI, local law enforcement, 100%. Multiple witnesses testified to Ruby's role as a courier between crime families. They testified to this, yet the Warren Commission said he had no mob connections.
Right.
And the mob had nothing to do with the assassination. Ruby just came out of nowhere. Ridiculous. You know how Ruby got into the police department with a gun? Because he was paying off the cops. That's why. In his strip club operations and his gambling operations, he was paying them off. So they allowed him to come in with a gun in the police station and get so close to Harvey as to put a bullet in his stomach. I saw it on national television when it happened. We all saw it. Continue. Financial connections. Ruby received loans from mob-affiliated businesses to maintain his nightclub operations. Financial records show irregular cash flows consistent with money laundering operations. Ruby made multiple calls to known mob associates in the days before shooting Oswald. You hear that? He made multiple calls to known organized crime figures in Chicago, in New Orleans, days before the Oswald killing. And it just so happens he did it out of patriotism, that the guys in the mob were so patriotic that they said, hey, you know, kill Oswald. Was so upset that John F. Kennedy was killed.
Yeah.
Give me a break. While his brother was cracking down on organized crime, okay, 800% more arrests and convictions as a result of RFK Jr.'s dealings and enforcement against organized crime, broke the deal he had with Joe Kennedy to back off. RF Kennedy did that, and that's why we got involved. Because Sam Giancana was told, hey, look what he did to you, look what he's doing to us, 800% more enforcement. We got to get this guy off our back. So yeah, we'll deliver the White House, and they'll deliver safety for us. Leave us alone. Go bother somebody else. Makes perfect sense. I don't think RFK Jr. put it together that way. Makes perfect sense. Get him to back off. We'll give you the presidency, just leave us alone.
Right.
Ruby's legal defense was partially funded by individuals with mob connections. Now, why would they fund his legal fees if they had nothing to do with it? They didn't want him to talk. Of course they were going to fund his legal fees. And you know what? They knew he had cancer. They knew he wasn't going to make it. And he was mob. He wasn't going to get himself killed, because even in prison, they knew they could have got to him. Ruby just kept his mouth shut. He knew he was going to die, and he was the perfect guy to pull this off, no doubt. I mean, the Oswald killing. Let's keep going. FBI informants consistently reported Ruby as a known associate of multiple organized crime figures. Ruby appeared in over 40 FBI reports related to organized crime activities before the Kennedy assassination. And yet the Warren Commission said that he had no affiliation. It's beyond belief. This government sometimes could be so damn corrupt, it's beyond belief.
It is.
Local Dallas police classified Ruby's establishments as mob hangouts. In internal documents, Ruby was identified as a person of interest in multiple gambling and vice investigations prior to 1963. What more evidence do you need, people? That Ruby was a mob associate, that Ruby was engaged by his bosses in both New Orleans. Carlos Marcello hated RFK because he went after him, dropped him, deported him out of the country, dropped him in a forest, in the jungle. And Marcello's had to get back. He hated RFK Jr. So why did they help? To get him off their backs. He was going crazy. His whole administration.
Again, I think I should point this out. This is from Michael Franzese, former, Bob Capo G. Didn't say it right. Bob Capo, captain, and he's going over what he knew. Was happy to Bob about them wanting JFK killed, military, CIA, stuff like that, and everything. He's related to underboss of Colombo crime family, stuff like that. He's the Colombo crime family. So anybody be sure to check him out and leave a like and everything. 92,000 views.
It was all about going after organized crime. From Hoffa to Sam Giancana to Marcello, he wanted to lock everybody up. So wouldn't it make sense to have a deal to get him off your...
Yeah, a lot of Senate hearings, people can look up how he attacked vigorously over and over again in Senate hearings and everything, the House and everything else, going after him and everything. They wanted him dead. He was really... They was losing a lot of business and everything from RFK. So let's go on to
Kennedy broke his deal. So he said that. We killed the wrong Kennedy. It's on tape. What more do you need? All right, so I hope I put that to bed. And let's see what happens with these classified documents. Let's see if they're real. And I've said this many times on Piers Morgan, on my own podcast. If those documents say that Jack Ruby had no mob affiliation whatsoever, these classified documents, discard them all. It's all baloney, it's all garbage, full of baloney, as I would say. Sammy says that too. Now, throw it away. Because then they're lying again, they're covering it up. There's no question about it. The government was involved with the mob in the JFK assassination, and I think RFK Jr., with his honest assessment of what he believes went on, he verifies it, no doubt. I want to move on to something very, very briefly, and I don't really know anything about this, so I'm not going to say I have any personal knowledge whatsoever. But again, I want to clear this up. Throughout my lifetime, I heard from prominent people in that life that we were responsible for the Kennedy assassination. No doubt about it. I heard it from my father. I heard it from Persico in conversation with Fat Tony, and general knowledge among the guys. And they don't brag about these things, believe me. You know, I remember one guy saying to him, I don't want to say who he was, hey, we can get to the president if we want to. We did it before. You know, I mean, it was common knowledge. I can say that.
I have a question for all my friends and followers. Have you tried my wine yet? You know, in the last 2 years, we've made tremendous progress with Franzese Wine, and it's really all thanks to your support, and obviously because people are finding out we have a great wine at a great price. In 2025, we aim to become a national brand, and I want all of you to be a part of it. Every bottle you buy, every story you share builds more than a brand. It fuels a movement. The story of our wine is one of people having second chances and of lives being transformed. That's the truth. So go to my website, franzesewine.com, and get your bottle today. Salud, my friends.
Let me move on to something very, very briefly. I want to just touch on it because RFK touched on it in this interview, and this was about the killing of his father, RFK.
I don't believe that Sirhan's bullets ever hit my father.
Okay.
And neither did the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, who's probably the most famous coroner in American history, who did an autopsy that is known as the perfect autopsy.
Very interesting. RFK Jr. doesn't believe Sirhan killed his father. I heard this before, but this is coming out of his mouth in this interview. Very interesting.
My father got shot 4 times from behind. You know, and he hit 8 bullets in his gun. He didn't reload. We know what happened the first 2, and we know what happened to the second 6. We know what happened to every one of those bullets. My father was killed from behind. He was shot 4 times. One of the shots went harmlessly through the shoulder pad of his suit. The other 3 were fatal or potentially fatal. And one of them was right behind his ear. All of them were contact shots. That's what Thomas Noguchi found, meaning the barrel of the gun was either touching his skin or his clothing and was and left a carbon tattoo, or was close enough, within an inch, close enough to leave a carbon tattoo. And the gun was being held at an upward angle.
So he is claiming that there's evidence that all 8 bullets from Sirhan's gun never touched his father. They hit other people. I'm not that aware of this incident. I don't know all the specifics about it, so I can't comment on it.
Yeah, a lot of people.
But this is RFK Jr. speaking.
A lot of people have asked for his release because they don't think that he did it. And I wouldn't be surprised either, because there has to be a scapegoat. There does. It always does. There has to be somebody that you always, throw under the bus for the common good of this, right? So,
Speaking about his father, I'm sure he did some investigation on it, and this is what he's come up with.
yeah.
And that man was almost certainly Eugene Thane Cesar, who was a security guard who had been hired the day before. So they already knew when he got the job, he already knew my father was going to be at that hotel. His full-time job was at the Lockheed plant, and before that he had worked
Lockheed
at another
stuff
defense.
sure does get around, don't they? With UFO re-engineered stuff and everything. Wow. Assassination and everything else, top secret stuff. The stuff goes together. I mean, it does. A lot of people may not get it, but I do. It does make sense.
which was Howard Hughes' company. He had top
Well, take
security
off to
classifications at that plant. He self-identifies as a CIA agent. He ended up leaving the country. He was very outspoken against my father. He believed that my father would start a race war, and my father would put blacks in charge of the country, and he hated blacks. And he ended up leaving the country. He died about 1.5 years ago in the Philippines.
So what he's
How
saying is that
convenient,
the
the
CIA
Philippines, huh?
put this guy up to it. This guy, Eugene Caesar. Wow. I don't know that to be a fact or not. I'm telling you what
I don't know as much
RFK
as
Jr.
I
believes
used to
after his,
about some of the
investigation.
stuff. I used to know
would assume that he
all
looked
about
into
this
this
stuff.
thoroughly.
RFK
If I
stuff.
had to, if I had to prove my case that the CIA murdered my uncle, I'm very confident, just on the evidence that is out there now, that would be very, very easy to prove.
That's powerful coming from RFK Jr.
Yeah.
Powerful. The CIA. Let me tell you something, people. Everything in the world is corrupt. There's no question. We have corruption in everything. We have reform in everything, every agency on the face of the earth. The most corrupt agencies or institutions, whatever you want to call them, in the world are governments.
Yeah.
Going back to the days prior to the Roman Empire, government, they're always corrupt. They're always in need of reform. They're the biggest agencies around, if you want to call them that, or institutions, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And there's corruption in all of them, in some way, some part. We're seeing it now, right now. In current times, we're seeing the corruption, the fraud, the abuse. We're seeing it. We've witnessed it. We know it. So why is it so far-fetched to believe that a government agency like the CIA, who hated these people, wouldn't be involved in the assassination? And why wouldn't they deal with the mob? They would deal with the devil to get their work done. It's not a stretch at all.
One thing my father told me, people in authority lie. And, part of the duty of living in a democracy is to maintain a posture of constant skepticism toward any aggregation of power.
That couldn't have been better said. I can tell you right now. People in
Don't
government
trust your
lie.
government.
We see it all the
Should be
time. We see it more now than ever because we have
Okay.
social media where it's repeated day in and day out, and it's part of history forever. They lie consistently. I've said this.
Lie,
When
cheat,
somebody lies to you
steal.
once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, you can't believe them or trust them anymore. I've said that consistently. I've said it about our past administration. You can't. This is RFK Jr. saying this. It's amazing
Well, our
people,
administration
what
does.
has gone on here. And I hope this was
This
eye-opening
one
for
does
you.
enough to.
So in conclusion, RFK Jr. during this interview, I think he's an honest guy. I think he meant well. I think he was misled in some places,
Yeah, I
but
think he was, too.
I actually support everything that he said here, other than the fact that he believes that his grandfather, Joe Kennedy, wasn't involved with the mafia. He absolutely was.
Yeah.
I've confirmed that throughout my life with people that I know, and obviously it was documented in the sources that I've given you. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.
Michael Francis. Say about it like.
We try to bring you the truth.
What's this leave comment even like? I don't think YouTube does not like to give you visibility. There's some people